Pearl Harbor Naval Base, December 7, 1941, 08:35 hours, and Lieutenant Naoji Iwasa, commanding the Special Attack Unit's midget submarine HA-22, felt the steel hull of his Type A Kō-hyōteki submarine scrape against the harbor bottom as he maneuvered through the shallow waters near USS Curtiss, completely unaware that Destroyer Division II's ready-duty ship USS Monaghan had just spotted his conning tower and was accelerating to flank speed with the specific intention of ramming his 46-ton submarine, a tactic that Japanese naval doctrine had never considered possible against their stealthy underwater vessels. The morning sun cast long shadows across the placid waters of Pearl Harbor as Iwasa adjusted his primitive gyrocompass and checked the depth gauge reading 15 feet, far too shallow for comfort but necessary to maintain visual contact with the massive American seaplane tender that would serve as his navigation landmark. Behind him in the cramped control compartment, Petty Officer First Class Naokichi Sasaki monitored the electric motors that had carried them silently through the harbor entrance, their Type A Kō-hyōteki submarine representing the pinnacle of Japanese stealth technology, and the secret weapon that Admiral Yamamoto himself had personally approved for Operation Hawaii despite fierce opposition from the aviation planners who considered submarine operations unnecessary complications. The Special Attack Unit had trained for months at the Kamigakubi Naval Proving Ground, practicing night infiltration techniques that Japanese submarine commanders believed would make their midget submarines invisible to American detection methods, and Iwasa had memorized every detail of Pearl Harbor's defenses based on intelligence gathered by Lieutenant Matsuo Keiu during his reconnaissance mission aboard the passenger liner Teo Maru just weeks earlier. Japanese naval intelligence had identified American destroyer patrol patterns as predictable and easily circumvented, with routine schedules that would allow Type A Kō-hyōteki submarines to penetrate the harbor during shift changes when American vigilance traditionally relaxed. But those intelligence reports had failed to account for the aggressive initiative that American destroyer commanders would demonstrate when confronted with enemy submarines in their territorial waters. 5 Type C-1 submarines carrying the Special Attack Unit had approached Oahu from the southwest, maintaining radio silence while their mother ships I-16, I-18, I-20, I-22, and I-24 positioned themselves 7 miles from Pearl Harbor's entrance to launch their precious cargo of Type A Kō-hyōteki submarines during the pre-dawn darkness that Japanese planners calculated would provide maximum concealment. Each midget submarine carried 2 Type 97 torpedoes with 772-pound warheads specifically designed for this mission, enough explosive power to cripple any American battleship, and the Special Attack Unit's orders called for coordinated attacks on Battleship Row during the aerial assault that would commence at 07:55 hours, creating chaos that would allow the submarine crews to escape during the confusion and rendezvous with their mother ships off Lanai Island according to the meticulously planned extraction schedule. Iwasa had studied American destroyer capabilities extensively during his training, analyzing intelligence reports that described American anti-submarine doctrine as primarily defensive, relying on depth charges and gunfire rather than aggressive close-quarters combat, and Japanese naval strategists had concluded that American destroyers would maintain safe distances from submerged contacts to avoid damage from their own depth charges, making ramming attacks highly unlikely given the substantial risk to the attacking vessel. The Type A Kō-hyōteki submarine's small profile and electric propulsion system had been specifically designed to exploit these perceived weaknesses in American anti-submarine warfare, allowing Japanese crews to approach within torpedo range before American sonar operators could establish accurate firing solutions. But this calculation had fatally underestimated the audacity that American destroyer commanders would display when defending their home base. Commander William P. Burford aboard USS Monaghan had received orders at 07:51 hours to join USS Ward in establishing offshore patrol, but the sudden appearance of Japanese aircraft over Pearl Harbor had transformed his routine sortie into something entirely different, and when USS Curtiss hoisted signal flags indicating enemy submarine contact at 08:35 hours, Burford's tactical training took precedence over standard anti-submarine procedures. The Farragut-class destroyer USS Monaghan displaced 1,395 tons compared to the Type A Kō-hyōteki submarine's mere 46 tons, creating a massive weight advantage that made ramming attacks devastating rather than dangerous, and Burford had immediately recognized this tactical opportunity despite the unconventional nature of such aggressive close-quarters engagement against enemy submarines. Japanese submarine doctrine emphasized stealth and surprise rather than surface combat capability, designing the Type A Kō-hyōteki submarines for infiltration missions where detection would be avoided entirely rather than contested, and the Special Attack Unit had never trained for scenarios involving direct confrontation with American destroyers using ramming tactics because Japanese naval planners considered such encounters virtually impossible given proper operational security. Iwasa's submarine had successfully penetrated Pearl Harbor's outer defenses by following the cargo ship USS Antares through the submarine nets, exactly as planned, but the presence of multiple American warships inside the harbor had forced him to surface periodically for navigation updates, exposing his conning tower to visual detection at the worst possible moment when American crews were at maximum alertness due to the ongoing air attack. The Type A Kō-hyōteki submarine's revolutionary design incorporated lessons learned from earlier Japanese midget submarine development programs, featuring improved battery capacity and enhanced maneuverability that allowed sustained underwater operations for up to 19 hours at slow speeds. But these technological advantages became irrelevant when American destroyers abandoned conventional anti-submarine tactics in favor of direct ramming attacks that relied on superior mass and speed, rather than sophisticated detection equipment. USS Monaghan's 5-inch guns had already engaged Japanese aircraft before Burford spotted Iwasa's submarine, demonstrating the aggressive mindset that would characterize American naval responses throughout the Pacific War, and the destroyer's immediate acceleration to flank speed caught the Japanese submarine crew completely unprepared for the speed and decisiveness of the American reaction. Lieutenant Iwasa had expected American anti-submarine responses to follow standard procedures involving depth charge patterns and coordinated search tactics, giving his Type A Kō-hyōteki submarine time to submerge and escape using the superior underwater speed that had made Japanese midget submarines successful in previous training exercises. But Commander Burford's decision to ram represented a fundamental departure from conventional naval warfare that Japanese strategic planners had never anticipated. The Special Attack Unit's mission briefings had emphasized American reluctance to risk valuable warships in close-quarters combat, particularly against relatively small targets like Type A Kō-hyōteki submarines, and this assessment had formed the foundation of Japanese tactical planning that assumed American destroyers would maintain defensive positions rather than pursue aggressive offensive actions. As USS Monaghan closed the distance at 28 knots, Iwasa realized with growing horror that the American destroyer intended to ram his submarine rather than engage with gunfire or depth charges, a tactic so aggressive and unexpected that Japanese naval doctrine contained no countermeasures or escape procedures for such scenarios. The Type A Kō-hyōteki submarine's 46-ton displacement and 78-foot length made it completely vulnerable to ramming attacks from vessels the size of USS Monaghan, whose 1,395-ton displacement created a 30-to-1 weight advantage that would make any collision instantly catastrophic for the smaller vessel, and Iwasa's attempts to crash dive were futile given the shallow water depth and the destroyer's superior surface speed. Japanese submarine commanders had trained extensively for engagement scenarios involving American patrol boats and escort vessels, developing tactics specifically designed to exploit the superior underwater speed and stealth capabilities of Type A Kō-hyōteki submarines, but these preparations had focused entirely on avoiding detection rather than surviving direct confrontation with determined enemy warships willing to accept collision damage in exchange for confirmed submarine kills. The Special Attack Unit's tactical doctrine assumed that successful harbor penetration would provide numerous escape routes and hiding places where midget submarines could wait for extraction, but the reality of Pearl Harbor during an active air attack proved far more dangerous than Japanese intelligence had predicted. Commander Burford's ramming attack represented more than tactical improvisation, embodying the aggressive American naval tradition that prioritized mission accomplishment over vessel preservation, and this mindset would prove characteristic of American destroyer operations throughout the Pacific War as crews repeatedly demonstrated willingness to accept damage in exchange for enemy submarine kills. USS Monaghan's collision with Lieutenant Iwasa's Type A Kō-hyōteki submarine occurred at 08:43 hours. The destroyer's reinforced bow striking the submarine's pressure hull with sufficient force to crush the smaller vessel's structural framework and rupture multiple compartments simultaneously, creating catastrophic flooding that doomed both crew members within seconds of impact. The ramming attack's effectiveness exceeded even Commander Burford's expectations, as the Type A Kō-hyōteki submarine's lightweight construction offered no resistance to USS Monaghan's momentum, and the destroyer passed completely over the wreckage before dropping 2 depth charges, set for 30 feet that pulverized any remaining structural integrity in the Japanese submarine's hull. Petty Officer Sasaki died instantly when the collision ruptured the control compartment, while Lieutenant Iwasa survived long enough to realize that American destroyer tactics had evolved far beyond Japanese intelligence estimates, representing a fundamental misunderstanding of American naval aggressiveness that would characterize numerous encounters throughout the Pacific War. This tactical revolution in American anti-submarine warfare had actually begun 90 minutes earlier when USS Ward encountered another Special Attack Unit submarine attempting to follow USS Antares through Pearl Harbor's entrance, and Lieutenant Commander William W. Outerbridge had demonstrated the same aggressive mindset by engaging the target with gunfire at point-blank range rather than following standard depth charge procedures. The Ward's successful engagement had established a precedent for close-quarters combat against Japanese submarines that emphasized speed and decisiveness over conventional tactics, proving that American destroyer commanders were willing to accept risks that Japanese planners had considered unacceptably high for valuable warships. Japanese naval intelligence had fundamentally misassessed American destroyer doctrine, assuming that preservation of fleet units would take precedence over aggressive anti-submarine operations, but the Pearl Harbor attacks revealed that American naval training emphasized offensive action and enemy destruction over defensive positioning and risk avoidance. The Special Attack Unit's 5 Type A Kō-hyōteki submarines represented months of preparation and Japan's most advanced submarine technology, yet 4 of the 5 vessels were either sunk or captured during the Pearl Harbor operation, with only Ensign Kazuo Sakamaki's HA-19 surviving long enough to run aground on Bellows Beach where American forces captured both the submarine and its pilot. The failure of the Special Attack Unit's submarine operations at Pearl Harbor demonstrated critical flaws in Japanese strategic planning that would plague their naval operations throughout the Pacific War, particularly the tendency to underestimate American adaptability and aggressive tactical innovation in combat situations. Type A Kō-hyōteki submarines had achieved successful harbor penetrations during training exercises against Japanese facilities, where defending forces followed predictable procedures and avoided tactics that might damage friendly installations, but American defenders operated under no such constraints and demonstrated immediate willingness to employ whatever methods achieved mission success, regardless of potential collateral damage. Commander Burford's ramming attack against Lieutenant Iwasa's submarine established tactical precedents that American destroyer commanders would employ throughout the Pacific War, particularly in anti-submarine operations where close-quarters combat provided advantages over long-range engagements using depth charges or gunfire. The USS Monaghan's successful ramming demonstrated that American destroyers possessed both the structural strength and crew determination necessary for such aggressive tactics, encouraging similar approaches in subsequent encounters with Japanese submarines across the Pacific theater. The psychological impact of USS Monaghan's ramming attack extended far beyond the immediate tactical success. As news of the destroyer's aggressive anti-submarine tactics spread throughout the Japanese submarine force and created significant concerns about American willingness to accept collision damage in exchange for confirmed kills. Japanese submarine commanders had previously operated under the assumption that American warships would maintain safe distances during anti-submarine operations, but the Pearl Harbor experiences forced dramatic revisions to Japanese tactical doctrine that emphasized escape procedures rather than offensive capabilities when confronted by determined surface forces. The Type A Kō-hyōteki submarine program represented substantial Japanese investment in advanced underwater warfare technology, incorporating lessons learned from German U-boat operations and Italian midget submarine successes in the Mediterranean. But the Pearl Harbor deployment revealed that technological sophistication could not compensate for fundamental misunderstandings of enemy tactical doctrine and operational flexibility. Japanese submarine designers had prioritized stealth and torpedo capacity over defensive capabilities, creating vessels that were extremely vulnerable to ramming attacks despite their advanced propulsion systems and navigation equipment. USS Monaghan's ramming attack also highlighted the limitations of Japanese intelligence gathering, as the Special Attack Unit's mission planning had relied heavily on outdated assessments of American naval capabilities and tactical preferences that failed to account for wartime adaptations and aggressive command leadership. The destroyer's immediate transition from anti-aircraft operations to anti-submarine ramming demonstrated American tactical flexibility that Japanese planners had not anticipated, particularly the willingness to employ unconventional methods when standard procedures proved inadequate or too slow for dynamic combat situations. Lieutenant Iwasa's final moments aboard his Type A Kō-hyōteki submarine represented the collision between Japanese tactical assumptions and American naval reality, as the sophisticated underwater vessel that had required months to construct and crew was destroyed in seconds by a ramming attack that Japanese doctrine had considered virtually impossible. The Special Attack Unit's training had emphasized stealth infiltration and torpedo attacks against stationary targets, but the Pearl Harbor environment proved far more dynamic and dangerous than simulation exercises had suggested, with American defenders demonstrating immediate adaptability and aggressive response capabilities. The ramming attack's success also demonstrated the effectiveness of American destroyer construction standards, as USS Monaghan sustained only minor damage despite the high-speed collision that completely destroyed the Japanese submarine, proving that American warship design incorporated sufficient structural strength for aggressive close-quarters combat operations. Commander Burford's willingness to risk collision damage reflected confidence in his vessel's construction quality and crew capabilities that Japanese intelligence had failed to recognize, leading to tactical assumptions that proved disastrously incorrect during actual combat operations. The destruction of Lieutenant Iwasa's Type A Kō-hyōteki submarine marked the beginning of a pattern that would characterize American anti-submarine operations throughout the Pacific War, as destroyer commanders consistently demonstrated willingness to employ ramming attacks against Japanese submarines when circumstances permitted such aggressive tactics. The USS Monaghan's success established ramming as a viable anti-submarine weapon that could achieve instant results without the time delays associated with depth charge attacks or the accuracy requirements of gunfire engagements, making it particularly valuable during rapidly developing combat situations. Japanese submarine operations never fully recovered from the psychological impact of the Pearl Harbor ramming attacks, as news of American destroyer aggressiveness spread throughout the submarine force and created persistent concerns about surface engagement survival that influenced tactical decisions for the remainder of the war. The Special Attack Unit's complete failure at Pearl Harbor, with 4 submarines lost and 1 captured without achieving any significant damage to American battleships, represented a devastating blow to Japanese confidence in midget submarine operations that had been considered virtually unstoppable during pre-war planning sessions. The tactical lessons learned from USS Monaghan's ramming attack were quickly incorporated into American destroyer training programs, emphasizing aggressive close-quarters combat techniques that prioritized enemy destruction over vessel preservation when submarine contacts were confirmed. American naval doctrine evolved rapidly during 1942 to include ramming as a standard anti-submarine tactic under appropriate circumstances, particularly when depth charge attacks were impractical due to shallow water or when immediate action was required to prevent enemy torpedo launches against friendly vessels. Commander Burford's decision to ram Lieutenant Iwasa's submarine also reflected American naval culture that emphasized individual initiative and aggressive action over rigid adherence to standard operating procedures, contrasting sharply with Japanese naval tradition that prioritized careful planning and methodical execution over tactical improvisation. This cultural difference would manifest repeatedly throughout the Pacific War as American commanders consistently demonstrated willingness to adapt tactics in real time while Japanese forces often struggled to deviate from predetermined plans when circumstances changed. The USS Monaghan ramming attack represented the culmination of multiple intelligence failures that had plagued Japanese submarine operations from the initial planning stages, including fundamental misunderstandings of American destroyer capabilities, tactical doctrine, and command philosophy that made successful special attack unit operations virtually impossible despite sophisticated equipment and extensive crew training. The Type A Kō-hyōteki submarines possessed advanced technology that might have achieved significant success against less aggressive defenders, but American naval tradition emphasized offensive action that negated many technological advantages through superior tactical execution. Lieutenant Iwasa's death aboard his Type A Kō-hyōteki submarine symbolized the broader failure of Japanese naval intelligence to accurately assess American capabilities and intentions, leading to strategic planning based on assumptions that proved completely incorrect when tested in actual combat conditions. The Special Attack Unit's sophisticated submarines and highly trained crews represented months of preparation that was negated in minutes by American destroyer tactics that Japanese planners had never seriously considered, demonstrating the critical importance of accurate enemy assessment in naval warfare planning. The ramming attack's immediate success also influenced American anti-submarine doctrine development throughout the Pacific War, as destroyer commanders gained confidence in close-quarters combat techniques that provided reliable results against Japanese submarines regardless of technological sophistication or crew training levels. USS Monaghan's victory established aggressive ramming as a proven submarine killing tactic that could be employed whenever circumstances permitted, encouraging American destroyer crews to seek direct engagement rather than maintain defensive positions during anti-submarine operations. The destruction of the Special Attack Unit's submarines at Pearl Harbor marked the beginning of a sustained American anti-submarine campaign that would eventually devastate Japanese underwater warfare capabilities throughout the Pacific, as destroyer commanders repeatedly demonstrated willingness to employ ramming attacks against enemy submarines whenever tactical situations permitted such aggressive engagement. The psychological impact of these early ramming successes created persistent concerns among Japanese submarine crews about surface vessel encounters that influenced tactical decisions for the remainder of the war. Commander Burford's aggressive tactics aboard USS Monaghan reflected American naval training that emphasized enemy destruction over self-preservation, contrasting sharply with Japanese submarine doctrine that prioritized stealth and escape over direct confrontation with enemy surface forces. This fundamental difference in tactical philosophy would characterize numerous subsequent encounters between American destroyers and Japanese submarines throughout the Pacific War, consistently favoring aggressive American commanders who were willing to accept collision risks in exchange for confirmed enemy kills. The Type A Kō-hyōteki submarine program's failure at Pearl Harbor also highlighted the limitations of Japanese technological solutions to tactical problems, as sophisticated engineering and advanced equipment could not compensate for fundamental misunderstandings of enemy capabilities and intentions during actual combat operations. Lieutenant Iwasa's submarine represented the pinnacle of Japanese midget submarine design, incorporating lessons learned from years of development work, yet it was destroyed instantly by a ramming attack that Japanese engineers had never considered a serious threat to their underwater vessels. The ramming attack's tactical success demonstrated that American destroyer construction standards incorporated sufficient structural strength for aggressive close-quarters combat operations, providing commanders with confidence to employ ramming tactics against enemy submarines without excessive concern for vessel damage or crew safety. USS Monaghan's minor damage from the high-speed collision that completely destroyed the Japanese submarine proved that American warship design included adequate protection for such aggressive engagement methods, encouraging similar tactics throughout the destroyer force. Japanese submarine commanders never developed effective countermeasures against American ramming attacks, as the Type A Kō-hyōteki submarines lacked both the speed and maneuverability necessary to avoid determined surface attacks in shallow water environments where diving options were severely limited. The Special Attack Unit's training had focused on stealth infiltration rather than escape procedures, leaving crews unprepared for direct confrontation with aggressive American destroyers willing to employ unconventional anti-submarine tactics that prioritized immediate enemy destruction over traditional engagement methods. The USS Monaghan's ramming attack against Lieutenant Iwasa's submarine represented a turning point in Pacific War anti-submarine operations, establishing aggressive direct engagement as standard American destroyer doctrine and creating psychological pressure on Japanese submarine forces that would influence their tactical decisions throughout the remaining war years. The Special Attack Unit's complete failure at Pearl Harbor, achieved primarily through ramming attacks rather than depth charges or gunfire, demonstrated American tactical flexibility and aggressive command philosophy that Japanese naval planners had consistently underestimated during strategic planning sessions. The destruction of the Type A Kō-hyōteki submarines at Pearl Harbor marked the end of Japanese confidence in midget submarine operations against well-defended American installations, as the sophisticated vessels that had represented years of development work were neutralized almost instantly by aggressive American destroyer tactics that emphasized direct confrontation over cautious defensive procedures. Commander Burford's willingness to ram Lieutenant Iwasa's submarine reflected American naval culture that prioritized mission accomplishment over vessel preservation, creating tactical advantages that Japanese submarine crews could never overcome despite superior underwater technology and extensive training programs. This pattern of American destroyer aggressiveness would continue throughout the Pacific War as commanders like William W. Outerbridge, who later commanded USS O'Brien when it sank the Japanese submarine I-24 through multiple ramming attacks near Kiska in 1943, demonstrated consistent willingness to employ direct collision tactics against enemy submarines whenever circumstances permitted such aggressive engagement methods. The psychological impact of these ramming successes created persistent concerns among Japanese submarine crews about surface encounters that influenced tactical planning for the remainder of the war, as commanders sought to avoid direct confrontation with American destroyers whose aggressive tactics had proven devastatingly effective against sophisticated Japanese underwater vessels. The complete failure of the Special Attack Unit at Pearl Harbor, accomplished primarily through ramming attacks that Japanese naval doctrine had never seriously considered as viable anti-submarine weapons, represented a fundamental intelligence failure that would characterize Japanese strategic planning throughout the Pacific War, consistently underestimating American adaptability, aggressiveness, and willingness to employ unconventional tactics when standard procedures proved inadequate for rapidly changing combat situations where immediate enemy destruction took precedence over traditional engagement methods that emphasized safety and procedure over tactical success and mission accomplishment.